Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to your Tuesday edition of the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boo Crew Media. I, of course, am your host, David Grubb. Glad you could join me on this hot Tuesday here in New Orleans. That was funny. I was talking to Justin. He was talking about before I started recording. He was talking about how much he is missing the Pelicans. And yeah, if you're a basketball fan at this stage, this has to be the most annoying part of the offseason. There's no draft to look forward to. There's no summer league to look forward to. At this stage, you're just waiting for the start of training camp. And so it makes it a lot harder to really think about these conceptual issues when it comes to basketball, because we're ready to see the application of all these things on the court, whether it's the new players, new coaches, new front office people, all those things. You're ready to just see the product on the court and start getting behind a new season of Pelicans basketball. But what's funny is, as we get closer and closer to the season, the noise outside of the New Orleans Pelicans regarding the roster continues to get louder, particularly with two players, on the roster, Zion Williamson and Trey Murphy. And that's why we just want to go off the top with this and call this the Untouchables, because those two guys, and I would say along with Herb Jones at this stage, those three players are the Untouchables. Joe Dumars, based on everything we talked about yesterday and the culture that he wants to build for this team and the success that he wants to have and that any leader wants to have when they're operating their franchise, when you do that, you understand a couple of things. You understand that you win with talent. And in the NBA, it is more so than any of the other major leagues, because there are only 5 players on the court at one time, and one great player can impact the game in ways that no other player in any other sport can. You can have a great quarterback in football and never win any games. Saints fans have belabored onto that in the defense of Drew Brees for years now, in that, look, you're punishing him for the things that the defense did and the front office did and not building a team around him and judging him as a quarterback. It's because the quarterback can only do so much no matter how great that they are. In baseball, you could have Shohei Ohtani, and for the majority of his career, he couldn't even make the playoffs because he was with the wrong team. And it didn't matter how many 40 home run seasons he had, how many bases he stole, how many innings he pitched. One man couldn't get that team to the promised land. In the NBA, one person can't carry you all the way there. Certainly, we saw LeBron James drag bad Cavs teams in the early part of his career. I'm not talking about the late stage Cavs that had plenty of all-stars, but the early Cavs that he took to the finals against the Spurs for the first time was a collection of some pretty average and some above average players, but you had the best player in the game overall leading that team and was able to take them further than expected. But ultimately, you have to have more talent than the other teams around you, and that one player who can influence those things. And when you look at Zion Williamson and Trey Murphy in particular, and to a degree Herb Jones, but Zion Williamson and Trey Murphy in particular, why are they untouchable? Because if you get into a 7-game series, both of those guys have the ability to be the best player on the floor. We've already seen that with Zion Williamson over 6 years. That when he's at the peak of his abilities, when he's healthy, when he's motivated, there's no one in the league that can guard him one-on-one. There aren't many who can guard him 2-on-1. You have to build the wall, so to speak, to keep Zion from doing what he wants to do. And even sometimes that doesn't work. And for all the talk about Zion expanding his game and people saying, pick up the 15-foot jumper, pick up the pull-up jumper, knock down the 3, I don't really care. We're into year 11 with Giannis Antetokounmpo. Man barely shoots 30% from 3 for his career. And yes, being 6'11" compared to 6'6" is a big difference for Zion and Giannis. But what I'm telling you is this: Jimmy Butler still never learned how to shoot the 3, right? We're well into Jimmy's career. The 3 has never been his thing. There are nights when he makes a bunch of 3s, but generally he's not taking them and he's not making a bunch of them. You got to be who you are. You got to be who you are. You can adapt parts of your game. And for somebody like a CJ McCollum, when people talk about CJ adding and making the 3 a bigger part of his game, but CJ was always a shooter. So you just ask him to take different shots. But when you are simply a scorer like Zion Williamson is, and you score in a way that no one can defend, your combination of physicality, agility, all those things, man, be who you are until you can't be that anymore. This isn't the same as a guard on the perimeter who relies on their jump shot to set up their ability to drive. That's not Zion Williamson. Zion Williamson can drive against anybody. He can put the ball on the floor, 2 dribbles, and get to the rim against anybody. You just can't deal with that combination. So to me, when you have a unique offensive player a player who showed that he can improve defensively. And I think we saw improved defense out of Zion Williamson last season. When you see those things, you don't give up on those things easily. And Joe Dumars did not come all the way down here from New York, uproot his family to get rid of Zion Williamson without giving him the opportunity to prove that he's not a franchise player. So untouchable, at least for this year, unless, again, there are always extreme circumstances that can change the way life goes and things would change. Fine. But Zion is not going anywhere in the near future. And I wish teams would let go of this idea, this fanciful idea that there's somehow a package out there that right now the Pelicans would be willing to accept. And the same would be for Trey Murphy. You think that the Pelicans would be interested today in giving up one of the 5 most talented players they've ever drafted? And people are doing this right now, rolling to, doing that accessing of your memory by rolling your eyes back, trying to think about the 5 most talented players drafted in this franchise's history. Ain't a long list, right? Anthony Davis, Chris Paul, Zion Williamson, Trey Murphy, David West. Is that we're going with the 5 most talented? Maybe J.R. Smith as far as talent went. But these are your most talented players you've ever drafted, and Trey Murphy's right there in that group. Trey Murphy's already top 10 in 3 points made. Trey Murphy's already top 10 in points scored for this franchise. You drafted him. You've developed him. He is everything that you've asked for a young player and a potential star player. He is a guy that everyone can see has all-star potential, whether it's as a shooter and as a complete player, his ability to put the ball on the floor, to create for others, to score for himself. The only thing he does not have is the one dribble pull-up, and I guarantee you that's what Trey Murphy was working on this summer. Trey Murphy is adding that mid-range shot to his game because he knows it's the only thing separating him from being a 3-level terror in the NBA. He can shoot the free throws. He can shoot the 3. He can catch and shoot. He can shoot off the dribble. He can drive to the bucket. He can finish over people. He's great in transition. Why would the Pelicans give up that guy? Particularly for the things that you've been seeing him offered for. Why would you give that up for Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody? Why would you give that up for any of these players that they're talking about the Pelicans? There's no one in Dallas outside of Cooper Flagg that the Pelicans should be willing to accept for Trey Murphy. There's no one in New York that the Pelicans should accept for Trey Murphy. There is more than just the on-court stuff when it comes to Trey and Zion as well, because you did draft those players, because you play in a small market and you have not engendered a lot of long-term loyalty with the players that you've taken, because your best players have never been here longer than 7 seasons. Not one of the best players in this franchise's history has been here longer than 7 seasons. So you're getting that opportunity with Zion going into year 7 now, Trey going into year 5 for him. And you're just about to get into the subprime years or prime years of their careers as they go forward, and you're going to give that up now? If you're going to get rid of anything, I'll get rid of the 8 other players on the back end of this team. And if I'm going to rebuild, I'm rebuilding around those guys. I'm rebuilding around Zion Williamson today. And again, unless he proves that he is unable to hold that mantle this year. But I'm building around Zion Williamson. I'm building around Trey Murphy. I'm building around Herb Jones. That is my base. That's my foundation, because all 3 of those are my players. I know at their best what they can do. I just haven't put together the system and the supports that they need to be successful on a consistent basis. And there's some things that they need to do themselves. Some are out of my control. I can't make sure that Trey plays 80 games this season. I can't do that. Yeah, he's played only 50 plus in each of the last 2 seasons. So yeah, I want to see him be more healthy, but I can't do anything about that as an organization. But I sure as hell don't want to send him somewhere else and watch him flourish to be a 25 point per game scorer for someone else and hit his 50, 40, 90 marks and do all those things and become a dynamic player in somebody else's building. Not when he's giving me franchise player talent and energy in the place that I have him on a relatively good contract. When you look at the Pelicans' big 3 and you talk about the financial issues of this team, it ain't because of their top 3 players. When you look at the top 3 salaries for the Pelicans compared to the top 3s for most teams in the league, Pelicans are right there. It's you've overpaid for a couple of players in the other spots, and your bench production isn't particularly great. But it's not because of your starting lineup and the pay that they're getting. You're not into the luxury tax. You're not into these aprons because of the starting salaries that you're paying. It's just that you had some salaries that were on the wrong timetables together. And now you've got to fix that. But as far as moving either one of those players today or in the near future, with that asterisk of something going terribly wrong. But as of today, nothing changing. Those two guys are untouchable. Someone who may not be as untouchable, and I think there are reasons why that we can understand, and we talked about before, for Yves Missi, and just the fact that he is one of your better tradable assets, and you're banking on the long-term future of somebody like Derek Queen to be your center eventually. Because again, I just don't see Derek playing the power forward position with his defensive liabilities as far as his movement and such. So you have to try to figure out how to make it work as a center for him. If that's the case, then yeah, Yves Missi could be expendable along the way. But the team that people are talking about doesn't make sense to me because of the cost. So you see that the Pelicans have been tied to the New York Knicks now for Louisiana native Mitchell Robinson. And Mitchell Robinson is going into the final year of his contract, which for the Pelicans, that would be attractive in the idea that you take in somebody in the final year of their contract that comes off your books, but you're giving up Yves Missi and maybe more assets in order to get Mitchell Robinson, another guy who's dealt with injuries in his career. And if you're giving up picks, if you're not getting picks back for this trade, I think that's a problem for the Pelicans. If you're the Knicks, I see why you're doing it. You want to bring in a younger player, a less expensive player on a very expensive roster. Mitchell Robinson is in the final year of his contract. Yves still has multiple years on his rookie deal and the options that the team holding his contract can exercise. I see why the value is there for New York. You get a guy who can run the floor on an offense that does want to run the floor, a guy who can block some shots, a guy who's great on the offensive glass. All of those things could work for the Knicks. And for the Pelicans, as far as talent goes, you see the potential in adding a Mitchell Robinson, sending him back home to Louisiana. Guy grew up in Chalmette and starred there. And then you bring him back and you say, okay, now you have this ability with Kevon Looney, his contract being a 1 year with the team option. You could move off Looney, you could move off Mitchell Robinson's contract, and you have a whole bunch of money. But it seems to me, why would you put yourself in a position of potentially having no centers on your roster besides Derek Queen if you take all those guys on? Because if Mitchell Robinson decides in free agency he wants to move on, if Kevon Looney shows that he's just not capable and the Pelicans don't want to hold on to him for a second year and he goes into free agency, now you're back on the market with no starting centers. And as much as people want to talk about the center position, again, I ask you, show me a team that made it deep in the playoffs yet last year that didn't make a heavy investment in the center position. The starting center position. Rudy Gobert was in the conference finals. He's getting paid a lot of money. Chet Holmgren was in the NBA finals. He's getting paid a lot of money. Karl Anthony Towns getting paid, playing the center spot. Karl Anthony Towns, Isaiah Hartenstein getting paid for Oklahoma City. Miles Turner just got paid to go to Milwaukee. The Celtics, before they broke up this team, had invested a lot of money in Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford. Show me these teams that had not vested, obviously with the Nuggets with Jokic. The Trailblazers have invested in the center position. The Lakers spent all summer looking for a center and went out and got DeAndre Ayton. The Mavericks rebuilt their team around the notion of having more players in the front court. So show me these teams that don't have a heavy investment in the center. So if you're the Pelicans and you give up a developmental project who's done well for you and overplayed his position so far, I think getting back Mitchell Robinson in a pick is not enough for the risk that you'd ultimately be taking. And it just doesn't make sense for me to make the deal at this time. This part of the year is also when teams and media outlets and whatnot start putting out their overrated and underrated lists. And the New Orleans Pelicans have two representatives on each list. And when you look at the 5 most overrated players per position, according to Fadeaway World, this is one publication. You also could look at Bleacher Report has their overrated players list, and so does, Ranker and all these other groups that put these out year to year. And the most overrated players on the New Orleans Pelicans, the two that made it, number one, Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole in a mix with Trey Young, who there is a huge discrepancy with how fans see Trey Young and how coaches and the media see Trey Young. Basically from his inefficiency as a shooter, his defensive liability, the fact that he's had these combative relationship with coaches, all these things for Trey Young. D'Angelo Russell, another guy who's been very controversial throughout his career in the way he handles himself professionally, the way his shot decision-making on the court, those types of things. Tyus Jones, another one of those guys listed on the list, and Terry Rozier, and you understand why Terry Rozier, an inefficient shooter, and a guy who is probably getting paid way more than what he should be at this stage in his career. But Jordan Poole being in that mix, and again, of the reason, and I got blasted for this in the comments yesterday from somebody, and I have no idea why, because I didn't say anything particularly negative about Jordan Poole. What I was pointing out is the exact same thing that I'm about to talk about now, is that his reputation around the league is that he is an inefficient player. Even last season when he was shooting his career high numbers from 3-point and whatnot, still only shot overall 43% from the floor. And at times he's been criticized for tunnel vision and only focusing on his own scoring and not making his teammates better. There will have to be some adjustments in his game. That's a big part of this, that the Pelicans are betting that he can evolve his game and continue to improve. If that's the case, fine. No one said that he can't, but I understand why there is concern when you've had a role, when you came into Golden State and your responsibility was just, hey, get up the shots. We need more shooting. That was one role. When you went to Washington, the job was not to win. They just needed players because they had to play games. The goal wasn't winning. So you don't get good habits when you're not playing to win. So I understand why there are concerns about Jordan Hawkins and what he may do. Jordan Poole and what he may do. Is he also a defensive problem for a team that is very bad defensively? Those questions are all there. I think that if Jordan Poole were getting paid maybe $5 to $10 million less per season, he wouldn't be on this list. But he is getting paid frontline starter money for a guy who is, by most accounts, best suited to be a high-level six-man. So we'll see if that discrepancy continues. I'm just pointing out this is the reputation around the league. Fans have no reason to not be excited about the addition of Jordan Poole. You can be excited, but you also have to look at the concerns. And when we do this, it seems like if people want to focus on this and talk about it's like hating or being negative, you're just pointing out that there are consequences to everything. There's a good side and a bad side to everything. It's called opportunity cost, right? You learn this in economics. For every decision you make, there's something you're giving up. It's that simple. So for Jordan Poole to be on the list, I understand why. I think his the things like with him and Tyus Jones, I think that those two are based on perceived limitations rather than the bigger weight of their problems. I think when you look at a Trey Young, I think people view him as a guy that is not a great teammate. That's not a problem for Jordan Poole. When you look at D'Angelo Russell, again, that's another guy who people wonder about his fit in locker rooms and how he approaches the game. We haven't heard those kind of problems about Jordan Poole other than that relationship with Draymond Green, and I think that would be tricky for a lot of people. The other person on the list for the Pelicans, and it's kind of a surprise, I guess, to me, would be Zion Williamson. And this is all, again, tied to his availability, the fact that Zion is not around. The other people that you put on this list, I think, are overrated in far different ways because none of them at this stage have the ability that Zion Williamson has. Paul George, I think, has been overrated for years and overvalued, and I don't understand why the young generation of basketball players idolizes him in the way that they do. These guys never won anything. He had one season when he finished top 5 in MVP voting alongside Russell Westbrook, and they lost in the first round of the playoffs. So what are we doing with this Paul George thing? Jaren Jackson Jr., a guy, again, who I think has flashed signs as far as being a great defensive player and a solid offensive player, but he's not a guy who rebounds the ball particularly well and isn't efficient as an offensive scorer. So I get the problems there. Julius Randle, a guy who has made 2 All-NBA teams, but is still seen as an inefficient volume scorer and an undersized and unwilling at times defender. John Collins is a guy who had a reputation as a really good scorer a few years ago, but I think injuries and his lack of evolution in his basketball game, he's still basically a guy who does the same things that he did when he came in as a rookie. I think he's, again, best suited to the role that he'll probably have with the Clippers as a reserve and getting the opportunity to make a difference with their second unit, but not as somebody who's going to be the star of your team. Zion Williamson, on the other hand, is still capable of being a franchise player, as we talked about in the first segment. So I think it's a bit of a surprise to have Zion Williamson on that list. When it comes to the most underrated players, Herb Jones, and I think that we are starting to get to that point where Herb Jones is being underrated by Pelicans fans in some regard. And I think you can go to the point of overrating Herb, but I think we are looking at last season as a referendum on Herb Jones when he only played 20-something games and was never really able to be the player that he was supposed to be. When the season started out, everybody was adjusting. He gets hurt, and he comes back, and he gets hurt again. The offense was still not good when he returned. The system wasn't good. The flow wasn't right. So I don't look at last season. And when you compare him to guys like Lou Dort, when you compare him to guys like Alex Caruso, when you compare him to other defensive first players, I think Herb doesn't have an extensive way to go when it comes to matching their offensive production. He has to get better at shooting the three, but if he gets back to that form that he was at 2 seasons ago when he was knocking down almost 40% of his threes, are we concerned then? Because he's not going to take bad shots. So if we're looking at his point total, what are we really talking about when we come to Herb Jones and him being, this offensive threat? Herb Jones doesn't have to give you 20 points. He doesn't have to give you 15 points a night. Herb Jones got to give you what Herb Jones gives you. And if he's consistent in that every night, if he's making his shots, whether he's giving you 9 points on a given night or 20 points on a given night, you'll see value in what he's doing. And I think that's why he continues to be on this list of underrated players. And I think he will be for a little while. The surprise for me was Jose Alvarado, who was listed as the 5th most underrated point guard, along with Jalen Brunson, Tyrese Maxey, De'Aaron Fox, Cade Cunningham. That's some heavy company to put Jose Alvarado in. And he's viewed as having that kind of difference-making ability for a winning team rather than for the Pelicans. And I think I would agree with those who say that on a bad team, Jose Alvarado is a luxury, and on a mediocre team, he's not a difference maker. So Jose either needs to be on a good team for you to maximize his value, because on a bad team, yeah, he can stand out on a bad team, and on a mediocre team, he shouldn't. Like, the impact isn't enough. So for Jose, it's this weird place based on his size, based on the limits of his game. And I don't think you can put him as an Alex Caruso type player, because Alex Caruso could be a starter for you. Jose is not someone who can start because of his size. Jose is not a guy who's going to be able to be dominant for you on both ends on a given night. You know what I mean? So, when you look at a guy like an Alex Caruso who can finish above the rim, who can get streaky from the outside at times and gives you a little bit more size on both ends of the floor, I think for Jose, his value is relative to the team that he's playing on. And when the Pelicans are really good, Jose has value. But when the Pelicans are not good, having Jose around makes no difference whatsoever. And so I think that that's ultimately trying to figure that his position with this franchise, if he continues to have high value this year, I would say that that's a problem for the Pelicans. If he has a rotational role, cool. If he's playing some backup point guard minutes, fine. But if you're relying on Jose Alvarado to be a difference maker night to night, then I think that says more about the Pelicans and their lack of difference makers at the guard position rather than the value of Jose Alvarado. And I think if you're the Pelicans, I would be thinking about how to get Jose Alvarado to a team that's a winning team in need of guard help in order to potentially get some draft assets, whether it's a second rounder, whether it's a low first rounder, a conditional pick, whatever you can get. I would be thinking about that in order to free up those minutes for Jeremiah Fears. If people around the league value Jose, strike while that iron is hot and get something in return for him today. The last part today, my 5s, as you see right there, I just wanted to kind of just have a little fun on this Tuesday. And because you see these things that go and people talk about, the historical position of players and things like that, and the debate of who's this and who's that. And I just want to make it simple again, because look, as you all know, and we talked about last week, I just turned 50. So in my lifetime, if I said in my 50-year span that the same basketball players I loved when I was 10 years old, that I look at the game the same way as I do now, that wouldn't be fair to those players that I fell in love with the game for or the players today. So what I want to do is give you what I call my fives. And there are 5-man lineups from different state, 5-man lineups from different stages in my life and how I was experiencing basketball. Okay. So the first one would be I was, again, born in 75. I really became involved with the game of basketball, kind of understanding it in the early 80s, obviously, when the Lakers and the Celtics were at their peak, and really starting to learn the game. The dominant teams in the East, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Philadelphia 76ers, and in the West, it was the Lakers, the Mavericks, the Trailblazers, the Jazz, and those types of things. So the players that I were part of that era, so my point guard from my earliest days, it was certainly Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson was my guy. And there was, I became a Lakers fan for two players in particular, Magic Johnson, and the center on that group was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who I still consider to be the greatest center of all time. And I saw this thing just quickly. I saw this thing yesterday where people talking about Dwight Howard was in the top 5 centers of all time. And I think Dwight Howard is criminally underrated, should have been in the top 75. But there's no way Dwight Howard belongs in the top 5 list, because we can already go off the top. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Wilt Chamberlain, Akeem Olajuwon, Shaq, Bill Russell, like you go right there, and we've already, Dwight Howard is already pushed down. I think Dwight is close. David Robinson better than Dwight Howard. I think you could get to 7 or 8 centers easily before Moses Malone before you even start talking about Dwight. But that's no disrespect to Dwight. But anybody who's putting Dwight Howard in the top 5, come on now, let's be serious. So Kareem and Magic, that starts for the number 1, 2 of my favorites. Again, this is about people can have their own favorites. Put your favorite 5s from different times, the 5 that inspired you to love basketball, the 5 that are your favorites now. Go ahead and put those in a list below, and let's just share that as basketball fans. But as I said, my first 5, Magic was the first point guard I really knew about. Kareem was the center that I really wanted to watch. I think, I was not a Michael Jordan fan when I was a kid because I was a Knicks fan. So the guys that I became fans of with that team, as a Knicks fan, I'd say Patrick Ewing was in that group. And then Sean Kemp, certainly of the Sonics, was one of my favorite players in that early. Sean came out, I think joined the Sonics in '89. So, when he joined the league, 89, 90, when he came in, him and Gary Payton, those were certainly, Sean Kemp was one of my favorite players. And then the 2 guard spot, I would probably say it was John Starks, and John Starks came along in 91 for the Knicks. And, but those were the guys in my early stages. When you get to that second group is around 96. Around 1996 is when, Kobe Bryant and that group enters the league. And I would say that my 5 at that time was Stephon Marbury, was my favorite point guard. Kobe Bryant was my favorite 2 guard. At the small forward spot, it would have been Kevin Garnett, or at the 4. I mean, I guess Kevin played the 3 or the 4, depending on the matchup. So I'll put Kevin at the 3. Tim Duncan, my classmate in college, was at the 4. And then Shaq would be my center at the 5 during those years, right there in that group of the NBA from 96 until this new era came along. And then I would say probably over the last 15 years, my 5 favorite players by position then at the center spot, I think I'd probably go with Jokic over the last decade or so. At the 4, I'd go with Giannis as my favorite to watch. At the point guard, at the time, for most of that time, it's either Russ or Chris Paul. Again, I'm a root for the Wake Forest guy, but I like the 2 different styles, the young Russ, the energetic Russ, who I hadn't figured out what efficiency was, so I didn't care if Russ missed jump shots or not. And then Chris, the traditional point guard, and his abilities. Those were the things that I really liked in the backcourt. And then, probably on the wing, I'm looking at, right now, probably, I'd say, if you're asking me right now, I'd probably say Trey is probably my favorite small forward, but that's, I guess, a little Pelicans bias because I've watched him up close, and I don't think he's the best small forward yet in the NBA, but he's probably the most fun for me to watch currently. But, I think the thing is we all continue to evolve. Your favorite players are going to be your favorite player. You know what I'm saying? Kobe Bryant is my favorite player of all time. He's always going to be my favorite player. There's nothing that somebody can do to change that. It's just like your favorite meal is your favorite meal. You can eat some better stuff, but if your mom made it when you were a kid and it tastes that nobody can recreate that feeling, that flavor from when that happened when you were young, it's not going to change. And I think the same thing is with sports. So I think when people do this thing about arguing and quantifying their favorite players and trying to prove statistically that their players better than someone else's, when we talk about all-time rankings and those things, certain things are undeniable. You can't stand up here and put Andrew Toney against Dwayne Wade and say Andrew Toney is a better two guard than Dwayne Wade. Not statistically, not idea, but you could say I'd rather watch Andrew Toney than Dwayne Wade, and I can't argue with that. And I think we have to get kind of, and I don't want to feel like I'm sitting on a soapbox again, but I think we can get back to that of just enjoying basketball for what it is, and it not having everything having to be a barbershop argument when it comes to what you like about the game. When we're discussing the game, we're discussing the league, when we're discussing your team, yeah, you got to have data. You got to have real reasons to have your opinions and inflection points to jump off of. But when it comes to why you like something, I don't want to argue like with people. I want you to like what you like. And I want to like what I like. And we both like basketball. So let's be cool with that. All right. So if you want to leave your favorite fives from different times in your life, the five that made you love basketball, the five you love basketball with right now, go ahead and drop them below. It's a fun exercise. Go ahead and do it. Think about it. Think about the players that made you fall in love with the game. All right. Until the next time, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode of anything that we have right here on Boot Crew Media. Obviously, a lot going on with the Saints, so keep up with that news and information as well. You can find me on social media at DM Grub on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok as well. Until the next time, this has been the Post Up with David Grubb. I'm him, you're you, and I'll see you on Thursday. Have a great one.